Hi there, this is going to be a video dedicated to answering some of your questions from Module 3. Most of them are about Mearsheimer's piece, but we also have a piece here by Stephen Walt that I might mention in my explanations and in my discussion. But let's start. Let's start with this first one. It has the most upvotes, 30 upvotes. Let me say there's a part of the question that I'm not 100% sure I completely am able to answer. I'm not sure I completely understand always the language that's being used, but there's a lot of good stuff in it, so I'm happy to start with it. If I am understanding correctly, international politics is about great powers acting and other nations reacting to their actions and motives. Definitely, I'm glad that you've made that distinction between great powers and other powers. I think certainly for John Mearsheimer, he is certainly about great powers. There's something to think about. Realists generally think that states are going to behave roughly the same. States, the main actors in international relations for realists is usually the state. The state in, I think this might be on the quiz, the state in anarchy, right? That's the main actor. And because the anarchy is experienced by all states the same, then for some realists, especially like neo-realists with Ken Waltz and that sort of thing, for some realists, like, states just act, every state acts the same, right? There's no difference, there's no differentiation between states at all. They're like billiard balls. They might have different colors and different numbers, and one might be a solid and one might be a stripe, but ultimately they all want to survive, they all need power to survive, they're all going to behave in the same way. But this is one distinction that some realists make, right? That look, it's clear to see, right, that some states are sovereign, maybe, right? Some states have power. Some states are able to survive for a long time. Other states are dependent on the international structure. They're dependent on other states, and because they're dependent on other states for their survival, right, we don't really have to worry about them, right? We don't have to really think about them. We don't have to either predict what they're going to do. We don't have to really factor them into our reckoning, right? Because they're there, I guess, nominally, but they're not proper states, right? And so that, I think we would say, great powers versus everybody else. And John Mearsheimer is very much talking about great powers, only about great powers. So that's that first part of the question. And other nations reacting to their actions and motives, I would say, to the extent that they can even act, that they can even react, right? That might be already too generous to these other states, right? They're sort of there at the mercy, right, of this. If we'd have read the Malian dialogue for this chapter, we could have done. But it's what is it? The famous line from there is like, the strong do what they will, and the weak suffer as they must, or something like that, right? So, again, it's about might and power, and if you've got it, you can do stuff, and if you haven't got it, then you're at the whim and the mercy of other states, and that's, for realists, not a great situation to be in the international structure. All right, that's the first sentence. Wherein does predictive outcomes and sustaining a sound frame of mind for the powerful regional hegemon? Okay, I'm not 100% sure I completely got that part. Let me read it again. When does predictive outcomes and sustaining a sound frame of mind for the powerful regional hegemon? Not sure. Meaning there isn't. Oh, thank you. Meaning that there's an explanation. Meaning there's a discussion of sound logic in international politics. Right. Realists do want to be logical, right, and they do want to start from assumptions, which you're about to say. If starting with inductive assumptions, yes, they do want to say that they're doing that. They do claim that, right? So we're on a good track here. As to what competition might do, right, or will do, I'm having difficulty comprehending how there will be ultimate truth regarding predictions of what China will do in the future. So we're saying, okay, so I think I'm gathering from that it's a question about, hey, if international relations wants to predict what China's going to do. Now I'm not quite sure. Are you saying that the assumptions that realists are making about the international system and about how states act in that system, that's faulty, and so it's not going to predict correctly? Right, that's one argument you could be making, and that could be made, and that is made, absolutely. Um, the other thing that you might be saying is a broader concept that realists would probably reject, and it's this idea that you can't use inductive assumptions to predict or to understand the world. Realists probably want to do that, right? And that really does feed into the rest of your question here, which it says, it appears that Mearsheimer is reflecting on the United States' past actions with the Soviet Union, but is this logically sound for predictive outcomes with China in the future, right? So we're saying, like, look, that's what happened in history, but as they say on all those advertisements for financial securities, right, past performance does not necessarily indicate future performance, which is what I'm taking from that last part. Just because the Soviet Union behaved in a certain way doesn't mean that China will behave in a certain way, and so why is this useful? Right, so that's what I'm gleaning from that last part of the question. I think it's a good question on that basis, and I think that does go to this the second great debate I mentioned, the three great debates, right? That is historical analysis, is that really the right way for international relations to go? Historical and philosophical analysis, is that inferior to not quite to what we're going to talk about now, but is it inferior to behavioralism, right? Where we look at, how do human beings behave, how do they react in certain situations, right? And then we sort of understand that there's some sort of human nature and that human beings do certain things in certain situations, and so because states are human institutions, we can expect them to act in the same way. That's behavioralism, in a very small nutshell. But what I'm hearing here is, what I would answer to the question is, yeah, there appears to be some sort of historical analysis, which some people would say, look, that was defeated in the second great debate. Why are we having it? Others would say, no, we're having it. It's useful to see how, if human nature is what it is, right, then it's the same in the past as it is in the present. So if this is what the Soviet Union did and the United States did in the past, China, in so much that it's a rival in the same way that the Soviet Union was to the United States, then we can expect some similar outcomes. So I think that there's a fair argument for that. But I think there's at least some realists who would want to go further, as I think you're wanting to go further, and say, look, it's not that we're going to predict the future from the past. What we're doing is, from the past, from our observations in the past, we've understood these assumptions, right? These general properties of the international system and of nation states, particularly great powers. And so because of these rules that we have, because of these assumptions, these propositions, these logical propositions perhaps, that we have about the world and about the way the world works, then we expect that, there will be or there won't be a peaceful rise. And so, translating that into John Mearsheimer, right? John Mearsheimer is saying that from viewing the past, but also just from empirical observations and from logical basis of realism, my theory of international politics is that great states want to dominate their own region, want to be the regional hegemon, and want to prevent other great powers from becoming hegemons in their own regions, in the other regions. And because that's sort of maybe that's an axiom, but it's an axiom that John Mearsheimer thinks has been already proven. I guess that's what an axiom is, right? Something that doesn't need to be proved anymore. Then he thinks that the United States will want to prevent China from becoming a regional hegemon in East Asia, and that will bring it into conflict. That will bring the two states into conflict. Not necessarily because that's what happened with Russia or the Soviet Union, but that's because that's what great powers do. That's a property of great powers, is that they want to have regional hegemony and prevent other states having regional hegemony. Now you can attack the theory, right? And you can attack that what he's taking as as axiomatic, right? As given, as not needing of proof, right? That's what great powers do. And how would you do that, right? I expect you'd have to at some point look at great powers. Well, you wouldn't have to do this. There's other ways too, like logical ways, perhaps scientific logical ways. But what many in international relations might want to do, right, is they might want to look at examples and cases, and they might want to say, these are the great powers of these different times, and this is how they behaved. Yeah, so I hope that's somewhat of an answer. I think it's a long question, a lot to speak about, and you certainly got a lot of upvotes, and so I hope that was useful to a lot of people. John Mearsheimer, this is the next question now. John Mearsheimer claims that the United States has been a regional hegemon since the late 1800s, but couldn't you argue that the United States has actually been the one true global hegemon up until recently? Definitely you could argue that, absolutely, and you wouldn't be the only one. My own personal views, you can certainly, you'd have to say, okay, the end of the Cold War, right? So we'd have to say that by the end of the Cold War, 1990, I think you've got a fairly strong argument. Until when? And for me, like, you know, the term hegemon, right? We have some sense of what it means, right? That it's sort of a global leader. It's a sort of a power that can't really be resisted by another power or by a group of powers, and that just seems very, very difficult to attribute to anybody in terms of if the whole world is the domain that you're claiming that across. I think, you know, like a combination of, I mean, we see in the South China Sea, the United States is not getting its way. You might say that's recently, right? That's when they stop, right, becoming. You know, you might look at the Middle East and say, is the United States getting its way in the Middle East? And it just had some sort of minor conflict there with Iran, and it doesn't look like it came out completely as the winner, right? We had to sort of allow, you know, we had to allow Iran to blow up one of our bases, right? Even if it didn't cause a ton of destruction and a ton of death, or any death, perhaps it was just injuries, but we sort of had to allow that and allow that to go as a non-response. Now that's obviously very recent, and so that might be, you know, with your alongside what you're saying, right? That you're saying one global hegemon up until recently, one global hegemon up until recently. You'd have to go back into the 90s and you'd start to say, okay, Yugoslavia, right? Does the United States look like a hegemon in that scenario? Maybe. Kosovo, does it look like a global hegemon? Maybe. And so I guess, you know, 9/11 and the war in Afghanistan and Iraq, are they still a global hegemon at that point? Do they still look like one? When they get bogged down in those conflicts, you know, is there another state or a group of states that's really opposing the US, like effectively opposing the US foreign policy in those wars? Maybe not. You know, even if they're not fully, they don't have it all their own way. There's no states that are really stopping them from doing what they want to do. At least not. It doesn't seem that way to us. So definitely you can argue it. John Mearsheimer, though, it's important to note, is not arguing it. He's arguing specifically about regional hegemony, and I think he might not think that global hegemony might not have a place for John Mearsheimer, right? Because he's very much about what do great powers do? They don't try and establish a global hegemony. They try and establish a hegemony in their own region, and then they try and prevent another great power establishing regional hegemony in their region. So China and East Asia. I don't know if there would be a danger of that in Europe. You know, I mean, maybe the Second World War, Germany, right? But maybe not since then. And the United States certainly entered in order to prevent Germany from becoming a regional hegemon in that region. Also, they fought against the Soviet Union, maybe in that respect as well, right? The Soviet Union probably was a regional hegemon in Asia, in Europe as well, maybe. Anyway, yes, I think you can argue it, but John Mearsheimer is not arguing it, and wouldn't argue it. I don't think. But I don't think you would not be a realist if you were arguing that. Okay, Mearsheimer says that no state can know the intentions of other states with certainty, especially their future intentions. Yes, if this is so, that's a very realist tenet. If this is so, I don't understand how Mearsheimer can make his claim to know that China will not rise peacefully. If international political theory is about predicting states' reactions to particular policy, then how can one claim not know or be able to predict other states' intentions? Yeah, I'm humming because I can see this from two different angles. One, I mean, one point I'd make is like, what are you going to do? You're going to say, okay, if we accept the tenet that we can't 100% believe a state's, understand what a state's intentions is. So, hey, so what's the point? Let's just all go home. Let's pack our bags and not do international relations anymore because it's pointless. We can never really know the intentions of states, right? Which seems like too big a reaction, right? And so we might say, hey, let's give him a break. Let's let him, even though he doesn't think that we can know the intentions of other states, and that we can't trust what they tell us their intentions are, then still let's make an effort and see if we can predict it. Let's make an effort and see if we can understand what they're up to, right? By these logical principles, these propositions that we have about how the world works. Let's see if we can apply those and see if they'll bear us some good fruit, right? That we'll understand the world better through those principles. The other way is, of course, so that's one way to answer the question. The other way to answer the question is, it's a bit weirder, right? But because we can't know the intentions, right? Because we can't know for sure what China's going to do, then that makes some space for prediction, right? If we already knew for certain what they would do, if we just were able to accept their word, China themselves said, no, we're doing a peaceful rise. So if we were able to accept that, then we would just know. We wouldn't really need international relations at that point. We just have to ask the Chinese, hey, what are you going to do? And they'll be like, oh, we're going to, we're going to have a peaceful rise. We are going to assert our own ideas of global governance and our own principles and we're going to tell you what we think the world should look like. But we're going to do it in a peaceful way, right? We're not going to back it up with any sort of conflict with anybody. If we could take that, then we wouldn't have to speculate, right? We wouldn't have to write this. We wouldn't have to almost do international relations anymore. We just have to ask what are you intending? So I like that question, and it's kind of a weird. It does, at least to me, it prompts sort of weird responses where the not knowing is sort of a prerequisite for asking the question, I suppose, right? For asking the question about whether or not there'll be a peaceful rise. But then it also does, right, suggest, if we read it one way, it does suggest that we can't definitely know that. And we don't definitely know that, of course. And that's why we have also, I said I'd mention him, Stephen Walt here saying, no, China's acting in the way that we would expect any state to act. Of course, they're going to try and develop nuclear weapons and that sort of thing. Ultimately, it doesn't really matter how many nuclear weapons they have. Anyway, the fact that they have a second strike capability is already enough. And so they're behaving rationally, they're behaving in accordance with what realists would expect states to do, and we shouldn't be alarmed by what they're doing because we already expect it. Of course they're going to do that. And that doesn't mean we're going to have a war with them because the number of nuclear warheads doesn't make any difference. I'm going to end that there. This is another 20-minute video, so quite long. I hope that some of that will help with the quiz, and certainly with an exam, right, that would use one of these questions for the essay question, and that's what you should sort of expect. And hopefully, at a very minimum, it was an interesting discussion for you. And I wish you all the best until next time.